Hello there, and welcome to part 2 of my initial idea for an adaptation of Uchu Sentai Kyuranger. Now do keep in mind that this is not necessarily how the official adaptation is going to turn out to be once it finally comes out in hopefully 3 or 4 years. Last time I talked about the initial idea for the first episode, and in this episode, I'm going to be discussing about how the other 4 Rangers on the core team are introduced. Last time I covered the Red Ranger, the Blue Ranger, the Black Ranger, the Green Ranger, and the Yellow Ranger. So for this episode, I am going to be covering how I think the story arcs for the other 4 Rangers, the Orange Ranger, the Gold Ranger, the Silver Ranger, and the Pink Ranger. So episode 2 begins with the original 5 that we got back in the first episode, and they are searching for others who could become Power Rangers. And what happens is that they travel to this sort of planet where the Gold and Silver Ranger are. As I had mentioned in the last episode, I am thinking that the Red, Green, and Yellow Rangers could all be humans from Earth. And while the Silver and Orange Ranger, I think, should still be actual actors, not people in costumes like they were in Kyuranger, I'm thinking that similar to other Rangers that we've had, such as Orion from Super Mega Force and Andros from Power Rangers in Space, they look human, but they're not from Earth. I mean, that was the case for all 10 of the first Rangers in Kyuranger, but keep in mind, Power Rangers changes things a lot, and they're very likely to do so this time. So I'm thinking that in the Power Ranger adaptation, the Red, Green, and Yellow Ranger may be human, but the Silver and Orange Ranger may not be from Earth, but they still look human. So, they go to the planet where the Gold and Silver Ranger are residing, and I'm thinking maybe they could... Well, I'm not entirely sure. In Kyuranger, they were like anti-heroes, like they were pretty much thieves, although kind of in a good way, much like their successors, the Lupin Rangers. Well, one of their successors, since the next season after Kyuranger was about 2 teams, one of which was a team of thieves. And of course, I'm not quite sure as to what order they're going to adapt the Sentais after they have adapted Kyuranger. I personally do not care as long as Kyuranger comes out, but I'm gonna try to be calm with this, since we did get the news about Ryusoger. So I'm not entirely sure about how the Gold and Silver Ranger could be adapted. Now, for starters, I'm thinking that even though they could still use the same costume for Balance in his demorphed form for his Sentai counterpart, I am thinking that even though Balance was not identified as a robot, as he even pointed out in episode 3 of Kyuranger, where he says that he's not a robot but a mechanical life form, I'm thinking that he looks enough like a robot to be called as such in the adaptation. Although I'm not entirely sure if that's something that Hasbro would do, but they could. And for starters, I am personally going to say I think that it's going to be very unlikely that either of these Rangers is going to be changed to female. I know that there are quite a number of people that are expecting a Kyuranger adaptation, and a number of people who are like, well, they should change the genders of some of the male Rangers to female, because there's not enough females on the 12 Ranger team. They really should make the females be a little more balanced. Well, sorry to say, I don't think that they should do that, and they probably will not do that. I mean, they could make the Gold Ranger female if they wanted to, but I don't think that's something that they will do, though. I do apologize for some people that want to see something like that happen. But I think that 2 female Rangers is plenty. There's nothing wrong with having a team of 12 Rangers and only 2 of them are women. So, you're just gonna have to live with that. And besides, it isn't so bad. Okay, so, getting on to that, much like in the Kyuranger episode, the Red Ranger meets up with them. That's what I am thinking. And the other Rangers fight against the invaders, you know, the enemy foot soldiers. And then, well, and then the Red and Silver Ranger end up getting captured, and the Gold Ranger saves them by hijacking the machine. And then, when the Gold and Silver Ranger are determined to help in fighting against the enemies, then their Q globes appear, or whatever they're going to be called. And then they become Rangers. And of course, the whole Zord battle, the Megazord battle, would take place where they would form the Megazord in the same way they did in the last battle, but keep in mind that since they have interchangeable Zords, the Gold and Silver Ranger could then come in. Well, they definitely will. Come in and take Yellow and Green's place as the arms, because, you know, it's the first battle and they need to take part in it. Alright, so that is pretty much my idea about how the story of the Gold and Silver Ranger could go. Probably we'll cover episode 2 of the adaptation, just as it did for the, for Kyuranger. So, now to go on to talking about the Orange Ranger, who was the 8th to make an appearance in the series, but was the 9th to join the team. And if you don't know about how that all happened, I will somewhat explain it to you. But I'm going to try not to, well, actually I'm talking about how it could be adapted and, you know, similar story. So, pretty much, there are certainly going to be some spoilers for Kyuranger if you haven't seen it. So, can't really say that there are no spoilers, because there pretty much are, because I've already mentioned them. Alright, so, the Orange Ranger, well, I think that in this next episode, with the Power Ranger team having 7 members, they then go to a desert planet where they meet with the Orange Ranger, and the Orange Ranger does not turn out to be very friendly at first, and he ends up fighting against them. What then happens is that he ends up using his stinger tail to poison all of the other Rangers except for the Red and Black Ranger, just like in Kyuranger. And what then happens is that the Red Ranger brings down his Zord to bring the others back to the base and see if they can get healed. And the Black Ranger also wants to take vengeance against the Orange Ranger because he believes that the Orange Ranger was responsible for the death of his creator, or maybe responsible for his creator getting poisoned. I mean, I'm not entirely sure if they would still have the whole Black Ranger's creator gets killed story arc, because Power Rangers has, from time and time again, avoided bringing in deaths into Power Rangers, because they did that for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, where Tommy doesn't die, but his counterpart in Zyuranger did. And I think they also did that for Zeo, where the Machine Empire does not die at the moment, but in O-Ranger, their counterparts did. And well, I'm not really sure what else to really compare, but one death that was capped from the Super Sentai series would be the death of the Magnet Defender. You know, because he died in Lost Galaxy, and and the same case apply to his counterpart from Gingaman. So I'm not entirely sure if the Black Ranger thinks Orange was responsible for his creator's death and or getting sick or something, or maybe being put in a medical condition, much like Blaze and Roxy were in Power Rangers Beast Morphers when there were evil avatars of them being created. Something like that. And, you know, the Black Ranger wants to get revenge against the Orange Ranger, but the Red Ranger believes that the Orange Ranger is not very bad. And I'm thinking that also there could be some sort of a behind-the-scenes look which reveals that the Orange Ranger isn't actually wanting to fight against the other Rangers, but he has to because the villains have captured him and are threatening maybe his life or maybe a relative's life or something. Although in Kyuranger, his older brother was a villain and might still be in this adaptation, or maybe he is wanting to save his brother or something, which I will go into more detail later down the line. So, yeah, episode 3, we have the Orange Ranger introduced, and, you know, basically the same story as in Kyuranger. All of the other Rangers are healed. Black and Orange fight against one another. And Orange does not join the team at the moment. So, we now move on to the next episode, which introduces the Pink Ranger. Alright, so some people had been thinking, or one person had thought up the idea of maybe instead of using the Q-let to determine the Ranger teams, just like in Kyuranger, you know, with the whole wheel where they spin it around and have 5 Q-Tamas come out of it to determine which Rangers are going to go out. And I would really like to see that get carried over into the adaptation, but there was someone who was like, well, it's not really going to work out if you're just going to have some sort of a wheel determine which Rangers to go out and just choose 5 random Rangers. Wouldn't it make more sense to actually use a computer to determine that? You know, like the computer says, these 5 are going to go out. Something like that could happen. And then for the Pink Ranger, you know, like how she ends up becoming a Ranger. In Kyuranger, she was sent down along with the 5 that were chosen to go out on the missions, and she actually has a dream of becoming a Ranger herself. And yep, you guessed it, I'm thinking that they could still use Raptor's costume for her counterpart, and she may or may not be voiced by Sierra Hannah, but personally, I do not care. I'm not quite sure as to how different this story could be between Kyuranger and the Power Ranger adaptation, because, you know, like maybe Pink Ranger says, I want to fight with you, and then, bam, her Q-Tama appears, she gets to be the Pink Ranger, and, you know, the whole episode just continues on the same as you would expect. That's all I gotta say. I'm real sorry about that. Well, that was just for the episode introducing the Pink Ranger, but keep in mind, we still got the Orange Ranger to deal with. Okay, so here is my idea for the story arc for Orange joining the team. And as I said before, I'm thinking that maybe the reason he's acting evil at first is because maybe the Rangers, no, not the Rangers, but maybe the villains are threatening him, as I've mentioned before. And I am thinking that he could be like, let's have all 8 of the Rangers come to us, and then from there, I will destroy them all. I will have them give up their Q-Tamas, and then I will be able to destroy them from there. Yeah, I'm thinking that we could just leave out the eventual Aqua Ranger and his little brother Assuming the little brother is still adapted, but who knows. I'll get more into that when we get later down the line. For the story arc, ending that off, the other 8 Rangers come in, they give it their Q-Tamas, and then right when it looks like the Orange Ranger is going to destroy them all, he then uses his Stinger Tail to knock the Q-Tamas all back, and he is like, "Oh, good. You had them fooled. I managed to bring you all here so you could help me to fight against them." And then the villains are like, "Hey, you tricked us! You tricked us! You were not planning on destroying the Rangers! You were planning on rebelling against us!" And then, the very first time where we see all 9 of the original Rangers fighting together, it goes into that. And then, you know, Orange Ranger is free, but the villains are still a bit angry that he just double-crossed them. And then the Orange Ranger pretty much explains the reasoning behind why he went bad and asking the others for help. Alright, so that about does it for this episode of my potential idea for what a possible Kyuranger adaptation could be. Now at this point, the next couple of episodes would pretty much be filler, so I'm not going to get into all of that. Next time, I am going to go over my potential idea for the story arcs between the Purple Ranger and the Aqua Ranger. I'm not going to really bother with any of the filler episodes that come in between, but, you know, this is just about the story episodes. Not the filler episodes, the story episodes. So thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't already, I would suggest that you write to Hasbro about why you think Kyuranger should get adapted when the Ryusoger adaptation, which at the time of the recording of this video, the name has not been confirmed yet, but whatever it's going to be called, if you want Kyuranger to be adapted next, I would highly suggest you write to Hasbro telling them why you want it adapted next, and the more people who write to Hasbro about it, the higher the chances are that it will end up getting adapted next. So, thank you so much for watching, and thank you to those who actually helped to support the campaign for getting Kyuranger adapted. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next episode.